You're listening to the Communications Business Advisor podcast, the podcast for communications professionals in the corporate world who are committed to advancing their work and our field's reputation as critical business advisors that are not only invited to the decision-making table, but are required there. I'm your host, Tara McDonagh. Welcome and thanks for joining. Today, we're going to talk about a few top challenges for both PR and internal communications leaders and teams working in a corporate environment and how to fix them. The first, lack of team time and capacity. Everyone else's priority is seemingly your priority, and with a function that puts relationships at the center of importance, we have a hard time saying no to people. And to be fair, we often see the value of what they're asking for. It's just that capacity is what capacity is. But instead of saying no, we often just figure out how to get it done anyway. This then leads to overwork, work that you're not proud of at times, and then this leads to near begging for additional team members. You think it's pretty obvious that the work that you're doing requires more team, and it should be just a simple solve. But it's not, because the communications function is wildly misunderstood and oversimplified. And on top of this, it's perceived as a cost center, not a profit center. Profit centers being the areas that make money like sales, and cost centers being the areas that are seen as almost necessary evils inside companies. The refrain often heard is, don't invest in them too much because they'll sink your profits. Areas like HR and communications fit the bill here. And let me be clear, that is a wildly short-sighted and again, misunderstood method of viewing the comms function. But that is a story for another day. So today, let's get back to the big challenges and how to overcome them. Team time and capacity is the first. The next, budget. This goes hand in hand with the first problem. If you just had more team, you'd have more capacity. And if you had more capacity, that budget problem would solve. But outside of team resources to handle the capacity of work, you also need money for things. Things like technology and freelance support and metrics and the list goes on. Now, how do we solve for these first two problems that go hand in hand with each other? First, stop asking. Seriously, it's similar to a child asking their parent for candy. Don't get upset here. Just come along on this analogy. Your instinct as a parent is to say no to the candy, right? It may please the kiddo to get that candy, but it's not serving them when you view it in the light of the greater good for them. The CEO's instinct and your boss's instinct is to say no also. Sure, they'd like to make you happy, but giving you the budget or staff is an investment, and until you prove otherwise, it's an unnecessary investment in their eyes. Entirely counter to what they have worked toward all of their corporate lives. Maximum efficiency with maximum profit. Instead of simply relying on them to see what's obvious to you, to me, to all of us in this comms field, that you and your team are overworked and overwhelmed and require more resources before you run for the hills, know that it's not obvious at all for them. So instead of asking, build a business case. Prove to them that this isn't candy a kid is asking for that will do harm. Instead, show them how it's not candy at all. It's essential nutrition. Essential nutrition to power the business. This business case is very different from an ask. So how do you go about building the business case? You start by creating a long-term strategy. People get confused by what I mean by this. Now, the watering down of the word strategy, it's a huge problem. So let me first share what it is not. It is not done in a day stuff that puts your brain on a piece of paper or a PowerPoint deck. That stuff is necessary, but it is not a strategy. It's not an editorial calendar of planned activities that you know you'll be taking care of this year. And it is not a request for staffing or budget or specific tools to get things done. That is not strategy. When I speak of strategy, I'm talking about matching your communications work, process, decision-making, and every single thing you do to priority company business goals using the lens of company purpose, mission and values, along with the business goals. That part is critical. The business goals as your framework. Some of you may say that you don't know how to do this long term, or even argue that it's unnecessary, that your activities change too often for this to be worthwhile, or that the company changes its direction too often. And sorry, not sorry, but I say that's BS. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you know that I tell it like it is, and I have to do that here. Another complaint I hear is that the company doesn't have business goals. Now, this one I can understand as a challenge, but it is one you can overcome. Here's why. Every company has business goals. You might just not know what they are. They might not have made them clear. The leadership might think that you don't need to know. Remember how we've talked about our field being oversimplified and misunderstood? So maybe they just aren't sharing them with you. Not sharing business goals with us is a key outcome of that misperception and oversimplification of what we do. So how do you find the goals if they aren't shared with you? If they aren't clear and evident? Or even if the business team doesn't know what they are? You ask questions. That's what you do. You do your best work there. You ask questions unapologetically and with an explanation about why you're asking at the ready when you're met with the perplexed looks or brush off responses. You're ready and prepared. Go in confidently. So I usually recommend telling people that your proactive communications work will vary significantly based on business goals of the company. So when you're going in to explain this to people, you say that you want to ensure that you're efficient and effective with your resources, and that you're being a good steward of financial dollars to know where to invest in additional effort and what's not worth the energy or effort. People, they tend to get that, and leaders very much respect it. If you're starting from nothing at all, a good place to start is with financial goals. So if you tell me that you don't have business goals, you do have financial goals. Every company has financial targets. They want to grow by a certain percentage or have a specific revenue target. How are they planning on doing that? New customers, growing revenue among existing customers, M&A activity. If you start conversations around how the company plans on getting to those goals, a whole wealth of information opens up. You become much more aware of what the company is trying to accomplish, and then that tells you what the business goals are, which then makes very clear what your communications objectives are. A company that's looking to grow through mergers and acquisitions will have a very different communication strategy than one that's goal is to go public, or one who plans to enter a new market and dominate it within 2 to 3 years, or one that's planning on getting sold to the highest bidder. Once your communications objectives align with the business objectives, you can then link them to your strategies and outline some of the tactics that make sense. Now, that part needs to be adjusted regularly, but you'll know some of the tactics right away. You can then also outline what no longer makes sense. This is the part where like angels sing in the background here, right? Things you're now doing that do not align with these goals can stop. Amazing. Maybe it's a newsletter or an event that can stop. Maybe it's something that could be handed to another business area like admin or IT. There's a whole host of ways that this can come together. And along with this comes your business case. Yeah, that thing that I shared with you earlier that outlines how to get more staff, resources, and get out of constant triage mode, while also elevating your whole team's reputation and your reputation yourself as well. So what do you need to accomplish these strategies you've outlined that align with business goals? Start there. Maybe you're making the case to start a new public affairs function and the resources are required to do that. Maybe it's a new program that will create massive impact on recruitment and retention. Build the case for what you can accomplish if you're given the resources in terms of benefits to the company. Be specific. If you truly believe that your program will impact retention, efficiency, or financial results, give them a sample of how. Put some numbers around it. This is your business case. And don't forget to show them that thing that you inevitably hear over and over and over again as you socialize this strategy. Deep breaths here. Okay. I'm going to say the word that we all roll our eyes at here. Prioritize. Yes, my friend, prioritization, that dirty word that everyone questions when the first whisper of needing more resources or staff is mentioned. You just need to prioritize better, right? Wrong. This is why you show what you're going to stop, start, and do differently, though. Don't take it personally. Prioritization is a gut reaction. Anytime a business area asks for resources, they hear it. Every single business area gets this reaction. And to be fair, there are likely areas to improve prioritization. I haven't worked with one client where I haven't made recommendations for process or efficiency. Not one, not in 25 years of corporate communications, whether it was me leading the corporate communications team or advising other teams. Even with the most efficient teams around. Every leader and every company can improve in this area. Now, that noted, I am not saying that you can simply wave a wand to prioritize and magically 40% of your workload is no longer necessary. I mean, that would be nice, but if it were that easy, everyone would have done it by now. But by showing them what you're prioritizing and what can reasonably be done with the team that you have, you then leave room for seeing what additional resources can accomplish with the strategic plan that you have created. Now you have a roadmap for long-term work aligned with business goals. You have a business case for resources, efficiencies gained within the team, and as a result of the process, the company leadership starts looking at you differently. I'm going to be back in just a second with more about that. First, another message.
The Communications Business Advisor podcast is brought to you by Raise the Tide, the program for women communications leaders and emerging leaders working in the corporate environment. Raise the Tide is part community, part coaching, part professional development, and part mentorship. The program advances women in their careers and activates these trailblazers to advance our vision of a corporate world that not only invites communications leaders to act as critical advisors, but expects them to. A rising tide raises all ships, but we're not the ships. Together, we're the force of the tide raising the ships for our entire industry. For more information, visit www.raisethetide.net.
So, regrouping here, you now have a roadmap for long-term work aligned with the business goals, a business case, you've gotten some efficiencies down, and now the company leadership is starting to look at you differently. What do I mean by that? Well, they start seeing the impact of your work in a new way. One of my clients that was trying to make the case for additional resources for 3 years started working with me using my communication strategy roadmap, and she got the approval for off-cycle budget increases and approval to hire new team members. And this was after a hiring freeze. She told me her boss went from thinking communications is helpful when sharing a project to an area that's essential to driving the business. Can you imagine the difference there? It's massive. And no, everything isn't rainbows and gumdrops over there for her. She's still working on getting to that next level for her business area, but she's light years away from where she was a year ago when we first started working together. Light years. It all starts from the strategy, with a business case included. And it is not something you can do alone, because if it was that easy, you would have done it already. Stop trying to see the label from inside the jar. Now on to that third problem, not being brought in early enough to weigh in on business decisions. The problem is that they, meaning executives and other business areas you work with, they don't know enough about what you do and why it's impactful to bring you into decisions. If you haven't listened to my first episode yet, we cover this there. So how do you go about solving that problem? The answer is educating without schooling. Basically, they need to know why they should care about what you do and how it can impact the business. So we don't sit them down and give them a one-on-one on why we need to be engaged. There's no educational presentation on what we do that will grab their attention, and it'll all seem self-serving anyway. We do it in real-world situations. The most impactful way to start this is by doing the strategy work, engaging the business areas in the process. This sets the tone and it encourages business areas to think of you differently. But also just recognize that it won't all change immediately. One way to encourage change is when something happens that doesn't negatively impact the work, you call it out. It's not about you needing to be involved or engaged. It's about the business suffering because communications didn't have a voice early enough to make an impact. Do the work and save the day, but do a postmortem and ask the questions that get people to think of you differently. Think of how the outcome could have been exponentially better by having you in the room. Again, you're more likely to get the change you desire by starting with a long-term strategic plan. It hits all three of these problems, and it sets you up to make an impact on all of these challenges currently creating problems for you, your team, and our industry. If you want support on solving the problem of lack of team capacity, budget, get greater understanding of your function, and gain respect for yourself and your department in the process, reach out. My signature communication strategy roadmap might be the thing that gets you off that merry-go-round of triage for good. That's it for today's episode. See you next time.
If you're interested in working with me to advance your work and your team's reputation as critical business advisors, never order takers, check out Tara at taramcdonagh.com. Thanks for listening to the Communications Business Advisor podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please leave a rating or a review. It helps people find us, and we can't ignite a movement without sharing the message. See you next time, where we'll continue to do the work to elevate our field's reputation and elevate the careers of the people in it.